welcome to the MessianTics podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now, here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby.
Hey everybody, this is Rabbi Jonathan, and today we're going to kick off a conversation. We're going to try to stick around the areas of kind of just like odd experiences at whether it's our own services that people who've joined our congregations or services that we've seen at conferences and other congregations that we've been visiting, especially in regard to things that we would consider disruptive or distracting things.
As far as in the expression of worship,
especially in the expression of worship, regarding both men and women, there's all equality here, equal distracting opportunities. So things like blowing shofars at the wrong time and rattling tambourines on the offbeat, which my extended family comes from Church of God movement, so the clapping on the offbeat is tradition and or required for salvation. So we don't judge. We're just going to talk. So anyway, tambourines I think would be a good one to start with.
As a worship leader, as a former worship leader, I'm assistant rabbi now, but as a former worship leader of 15 years, in solely Messianic, setting. Well, being involved in worship for 15 years, worship leader. My first 4 years in the Messianic movement, I played bass on a worship team. But when you're involved in worship, it is especially maddening when someone decides to bring an instrument of their choice. It's usually a tambourine, and decide that they want to bang it during worship, and it's incredibly distracting, actually. It is out of order. Now, some people would look at that and say, well, there's freedom in worship, and there's this, that, and the other. And I'm like, no. No. People love that word. Yeah. Believers love the word freedom.
Yeah. Freedom, liberty.
Because they think that freedom means we can do what we want as long as we're expressing it towards the Lord in worship. And there's freedom. Let's just be free. Let's just be free to act nuts. And that is not what God intended. And I know a lot of times we laugh with the tambourine stories, and I think they're funny looking back. But when you're up there leading worship and you can hear it, it's maddening. Yeah. And the double problem is it's a two-sided problem. Not only do you have the person bringing in the tambourine, I've seen shamashim, who are tasked with making sure things are orderly during service, like afraid to go up to him and talk to him.
Like, hey, can you wait?
No, because they want to be nice. Yeah. Because they think that, serving the Lord is like, well, we just need to be nice to everybody and never say anything. I mean, I was in Savannah. When I led worship in Savannah, we had a lady that brought in a tambourine. This lady had been coming for a while. Came to tour studies, involved. Banging a tambourine one day, just brought it in, hitting it against her leg,
Yeah.
And the rabbi at the time in Savannah, he walked up to her. And this is what I loved about him. Like, if he saw something, if he saw a weed come out of the ground, he was like, excavator, dig it out. He was, proactive leadership, right?
Plus the 5 feet of dirt around it.
Right. So he just went up to her and said, hey, listen, it's very distracting. I know you mean well. She never came back.
Oh, he took away a tambourine, man.
Over a tambourine.
Yeah.
I hate unauthorized tambourines with a passion.
So saying unauthorized tambourine suggests there's such a thing as an authorized tambourine. Look, if a license you can have somewhere.
Exactly. In my opinion, if you want to participate in worship in the congregation with an instrument or with a microphone or whatever, you have to be on the worship team, right? And if you're on the worship team, that means you've been approved by the worship leader and the leadership to be involved in that. And so if the worship leader says, hey, I have a great idea, you should use a tambourine in the set this week. Yeah. Awesome. I'm okay with that. I won't lie and say that I also still hate that idea because, like, one on stage invites the 30 in the crowd.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, like, that's one thing. But if somebody just randomly, like, rolls up one day, like Rabbi Toby was saying, they just randomly roll up one day with a tambourine and just start going to town with it. And look, let's be honest, nobody with a tambourine in the crowd knows what rhythm is.
Right.
They just know what sound is and start making as much as it's like, this isn't Purim. We're not trying to drown out Haman's name. Like, we don't need groggers in the worship service.
I watched one lady. She wasn't even trying to be rhythmic. She would just clap her hand against it when she was, I guess, when she decided she was going to be excited or whatever. There was no rhyme or reason to it.
It's really interesting to me that that nobody.
Wait, here comes the guy that came from a Pentecostal background.
That's right.
Talk about these tambourines now.
That's right. Yeah. Nobody would...
Did yours have a dove with the feathers?
Go away. Nobody would just walk into a church or synagogue with a guitar, sit in the audience, and just start playing along with the worship team, or bring in a drum set and play along with the worship team, or grab a trumpet or whatever. But for some reason we think tambourine, that's, whatever. And people take the verse that says make a joyful noise way too far.
Yes.
And nobody, to my knowledge, in the history of mankind has ever said what we need now is more tambourine.
Yeah, no.
I don't think that's ever been said in the history of mankind. So, again, tambourine has a purpose. It is a biblical instrument, playing the cymbals. It is a biblical instrument, but it is an instrument that should be part, if it's going to be used, should be part of the worship team or authorized by the worship leader. The same way shofars. Mm-hmm. Shofar is an instrument. It's an instrument of praise. There are purposes for a shofar. Now, if during a service, a worship service, the worship leader says, okay, at this point in the song, we want everybody with the shofar, blow the shofar in Zion. When you hear those words, let's all do this in unity. Then they're doing it in accordance with what's happening.
David's like, no.
Bad song. But could have picked a better one to use for that.
Okay. But the point is, it's an authorized use of an instrument within the scope of worship.
Look, I've been in Messianic congregations the majority of my life, and I've experienced every variety of rogue, unauthorized shofarot blasting imaginable, including.
Yeah. I've only seen that. I've only seen that one. I've only seen shofars being blown once. Tambourines, numerous.
Yeah. Including not this past December, but last December, 2021 at Southeast Regional, where we actually had to get up and move seats because the entire row of people behind us, we're talking like 30 people behind us, the entire row had shofarot out, and we're blasting them with the most obscene times, and it had nothing. Like, nothing's worse than when somebody's up preaching and you pull out a shofar and start blowing it. Like, it's just absurd. And so, like, in our congregation, because I've experienced this and I've seen so many times, and I've been in congregations, and I won't name names, but I've been in congregations where, like, the attitude of the leadership was, like Rabbi Eric just said, make a joyful noise unto the Lord. And so if they want to do it, whatever. I'm like, no, we can't. We're not going to do that. No, that's not going to fly with me. So in our congregation, we decided early on, first and foremost, like, blowing a shofar in a synagogue on Shabbat is already an oddity to most of the Jewish world, because it's not considered okay to carry the shofar and so on. So the fact that we're even considering using shofarot in our services can be problematic as it is, right?
Yeah.
But then you disrupt things out of the weirdest possible way, and it ruins it even more. So in our congregation, we were like, you know what? We're Messianic synagogue. Like, I understand a shofar has become like the symbol of Messianic Judaism in a lot of ways, and everybody's like, we're going to blow shofarot and and all this. So in our congregation, we're like, all right, the way we're going to try to kind of hold the curb a little bit and the hurt a little bit and kind of mitigate some of this is we have two specific spots in our service that we have intentionally designated as like free for all. Everybody can grab a shofar and blow it. But there's only these two spots. And what's really interesting is people have kind of figured it out on their own. Nobody else is blowing them any other time. So these are the two times. If you want to blow your shofar, this is where you do it. Nowhere else. And that's at the beginning of the service as like the call to... Almost knocked my microphone in my lap. As the call to worship, I had a little too much Jewish hands going on here.
At least it wasn't coffee.
My hands were flying around too much while I was talking. But the beginning of the service is like a call to worship to draw people in. We blow the shofar. I think you guys do the same thing at Bradon.
Which is a biblical use for a shofar.
And then in our Torah service, we have a really interesting and unique thing that we do in our Torah service that I developed a few years back. It's probably 6 or 7 years ago, where as we get ready to open the Torah scroll, we've processed it around the sanctuary, brought it up, undressed it, laid it down on the reading table. As we get ready to read from the Torah scroll, as a community, we read from Exodus 19:16 through 19. 19, which is like the beginning of the voice of God, the Bat Kol speaking the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 words to Israel.
Yeah.
And it tells us that in that passage that, God, as we've talked in previous episodes, God told Israel to prepare yourself for 3 days, and then I'm going to reveal myself to you and speak to you. And before the voice of the Lord came forth, there was this heavenly shofar blast that grabbed their hearts. And so, I always say some spiel along the lines of, we believe that we serve a God who's alive and well today, that he speaks to us as much today as ever in history of creation, that one of the primary ways he speaks to us is through his word. So as we prepare to hear his voice come forth from his word, we blow the shofar to commemorate what Israel experienced at Sinai, but also to awaken our hearts and prepare ourselves for the voice of the Lord about to come forth from his word. And so we allow everybody, we'll read that passage, and then after the last word of verse 19, those that have will all blow their shofar together, and then we open up the Torah scroll and read from it. It's actually a really cool addition to our service.
Yeah, and we want to make clear, or at least I want to make clear, I assume the other guys will agree with me, that the shofar has a powerful sound
and prophetic,
and it's prophetic, and it's meaningful. And when somebody who knows how to blow a shofar blows a shofar, it does grab the heart of the listener, and all of those things. So we're not anti-shofar.
Yeah.
And I don't want to come off that way, but I do think that
I'm anti out of order.
Right, but it's the same way. We have some amazing cantors at our chazanim, at our congregation, who have beautiful voices that chant the melodies of our people that have been around for thousands of years. And although when you listen to them, it touches your heart. It raises the spirit within you. It draws you into worship. We would never expect a chazan or a cantor to stand up in the middle of a sermon and just start canting Lecha Dodi or one of the prayers of our people. It just wouldn't happen. And likewise, the shofar is a powerful instrument. It's an instrument of war. It's an instrument of worship. It's an instrument of coronation. There are purposes for it, and it does grab the heart of the people.
Yeah.
But there's an order. There's a time and a place and a way to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think we've beaten the shofar.
Yeah,
no. I'm holding on to
You're holding on to one?
Well, I just want to say that anybody who blows the shofar at an inappropriate moment, which would, let's just give a scenario, the worship team's playing, and I don't know, it's just any point during worship, and someone decides to blow their shofar during worship, that person needs to be corrected.
With the shofar.
The person with the shofar
Across the head.
Right. But I mean, look, it can't. I've heard that, not heard. I mean, if we look in the scripture, when the Holy Spirit fell on Yeshua, it was a dove. Mm-hmm. When you try to walk up to a dove acting all crazy and loud and see what it does, it's going to fly away. And I have seen the Holy Spirit sucked out of a room because of some person being
out of order.
A person.
That double fly away and crap
now, I
on.
will say that if somebody does that at our congregation, if they're a first-time visitor or they're this first time they've done it, I will generally wait till after service and call them aside and say, look, we appreciate your desire. We appreciate your desire, but we don't, there's appropriate times, if you have a shofar at the beginning of service, everybody blows it. It's a time to do it, kind of thing. So
we appreciate your enthusiasm. Could you please turn it down a dial?
Right. So that's one. And another one of the things that we've talked a little about tambourines.
Well, what I was saying earlier.
You're going to shofar it?
No. I was just saying that. I'm going to hold on to this authorized versus unauthorized thing. I want to start printing out certificates and being like, look, unless you have one of these, you are not authorized in synagogue to blow the shofar or to shake your tambourine. You have to be licensed.
Got to go through the special course. You got to pay your fee.
Get it notarized.
Background check.
I would almost want to have a graphic up that's part of the rotating graphics that says, hey,
no unauthorized shofar.
No, something like that. Yeah,
I'll start a movement in the IMCS. They'll be like, we want constitutional carry for shofarot and tambourine.
So anyhow,
but no, I think the next one another one that we discussed, we did tambourines and shofar, and the third one is flags / dancers. Now, for me, I think flags can be a beautiful expression with a dance team. But the times I've seen it as a beautiful expression is when it is in order, and it is managed by the leader of the dance team.
Yeah.
I have seen dance teams, because they were under weak leadership, or if any leadership at all, it was just they would start off dancing together and then suddenly would break off by themselves and go to different parts of the building, and you'd have these rogue dancers, and that turned into something inappropriate that led to someone getting removed from the dance team because of a spirit, which was being allowed because the dance leader wasn't leading.
Wow.
So for me, like, I don't want to see that stuff. And like, we had a lady at one congregation, one of my congregations I attend, we called her the flag lady. She showed up, she had it was like Rambo. She had her whole arsenal of different flags for different reasons.
Like
this is for close range, this is for long range, all this stuff. And she would end up at the very center of the congregation during worship in front of the bema, waving her flags around. And it was such a repellent spirit.
Yeah.
It was, so I'm not for the rogue dancers.
Yeah, I think that what we're dealing with in a large, because at least what I hear from you, Toby, is the demonstrative me-isms.
Yes.
Yeah. Rather than this is supposed to be unto the Lord. This is supposed to be.
show.
So I have been to, and there's one congregation in particular that has a young man that does flags as part of the worship team. And he is extremely proficient at waving flags and doing and all that.
Yes.
But you can
continuing that up each year.
But you can tell that he's worshiping God, and even though he's in front, and even though he's center to the congregation, people aren't looking at him going, this is his show, or it just becomes part of the worship. The same way that if a tambourine, jumping back to that, is part of the worship team and is in place, nobody goes, oh, can you hear that? That tambourine is the focus of this. And the same way, we have our worship leader, Tamra, is an amazing piano player. And if you watch her playing the piano, she's doing all kinds of things with the keys and going but it's not flourishes. It's not standing out. It blends in with the fullness of what's going on. Where there's other people that it's like Jerry Lee Lewis. They're the show taking place in the thing. So it's not just tambourines or shofars or flags, but it's the heart behind it. Is this about God or is this about me?
Which is why, I don't. I've been in worship teams where we spent 30 minutes working on guitar solos, and I'm like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Because that guitar solo isn't proclaiming the Word of God. And in all my years as a worship leader, I don't think I've ever done a guitar solo. I'm not.
Be like Tim Hawkins' guitar solo, where he's like, guitar solo, ding!
I've never really done it.
Yeah, but I think that's really part of the issue is the heart. It is the person doing the flags because they're worshiping God, and there are those who do that. You can tell it's not about them. I've seen there's one lady at a congregation I've been to that does flags as part of her worship, but she stands in the back and she's not drawing attention to herself, and she's just worshiping God, waving flags, and she's not hitting anybody. Nobody's ducking to get out the way. It's not all of that. It's just her form of worship, and it's authorized. Yeah. The leadership said you're welcome to do this as this. It's not just somebody pulling out a flag from somewhere and just waving it on their own without any.
Yeah, and you can even see it with people during liturgy. Like, for instance, no, I don't want to be legalistic about this and say you can't sing loud or anything like that, but I've been to conferences and I've been in congregations where I've heard people just in the congregation and they're singing liturgy and they're singing like an opera singer and they're really loud, and I'm like, okay, you need to cool it.
Yeah.
And I was at a congregation where it was a woman that was singing really, really loud, and she was just belting over the worship leader and everybody. And the rabbi said we've had to have several conversations with her about, you are singing too loud, you're singing over the worship leader, and it's getting a little outside of order.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and you said the word leader several times. The reason we have a worship leader is because the other people are supposed to follow the worship leader. We have a liturgy leader because they're supposed to follow the liturgy. They're not supposed to lead the liturgy. the congregation follows the leading of the person who's leading the liturgy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a cantor at my congregation, and I am mindful of my volume when I'm singing, and I'm not leading. Yeah,
it's funny. I was actually doing liturgy one time, and it's someone started off in the audience with the wrong key, and I got to where we were, and I was able to, because I had the microphone, I was able to bring it back to the right. But someone had started off. I was like, no. You are not leading right now.
That's when I lead liturgy. People tend to say I go a little fast, so when I intentionally slow things down, I'll intentionally slow it down so that everybody can follow along with me. But if I get 2-3 lines into that prayer and notice nobody is singing with me, I'm going to go back the way I do it because I'm leading. So I'm
and so we've talked a little about tambourines and shofars and flags, and from flags it's almost a natural transition to tallitot.
Yes,
because I've seen people who use their tallit as if it was a flag, who, and during worship would pull their tallit off and start spinning it and waving it in the air it's like, come on, people, let's, dragging it on the ground, all kinds of stuff. Tallitot are,
I had somebody get mad at me once because in our service I wear a tallit the entire service until the message. And at the message, I take my tallit off and I set it down, and then I preach. And then at the end of service, when the message is over and I'm getting ready for the Birkat Kohanim, I'll put it back on. Well, the reason why is because originally we didn't have AC over the center part of the stage, where there were no vents there. There were vents on the sides of the stage, where the worship team was, but there weren't vents over the center where we stood. And so it would get really hot. So I would just take my tallit off because it was just boiling up there.
Now it's more habit.
And now it's more comfortable. So I take it off and I just keep rolling with it. But I had somebody that actually got mad at me, and it was one of the reasons they gave for leaving our congregation was because I took my tallit off to preach. I'm like, bro, I wear a tallit katan all the time.
Yeah.
The tallit gadol is literally just there for symbolic purpose at this point.
Yeah.
That's it. But it's funny how people get so out of whack over things like a tallit. And, like you were saying, people dancing around and swinging them around and they become flags in a lot of ways. It's absurd. There's a reverence to the garment. It's got a purpose and there's a reverence to it.
It's a garment of worship. It's a garment of sanctification. It's a garment. It's symbolic of the priestly garments. It's symbolic of
the Torah itself.
Of God's covering. It's those things,
and it can be a phenomenal resource. And there are those that theorize that when Paul said to go into your prayer closet, this is what he was talking about, because there are certain aspects of traditional liturgical prayer that you fully wrap yourself and encompass yourself in the tallit as you're saying the prayers. And so
I fall into that camp. But Paul,
I agree with all that.
I do too.
I just think it's weird when I see things like one time I was at the airport in Atlanta and I saw this group of women and they were walking and they were wearing regular clothes, like regular clothes as far as that they weren't dressed like Hasidim or anything. I don't think they were Jewish at all, to be honest with you. But they were just walking, and they were all wearing male tallits.
Oh, wow.
And it just looked so weird. And I have to say that I think it's really weird when I see a woman wearing a male tallit and a kippah.
Yeah, I was going to bounce on that too.
It's weird.
Yeah. Go ahead.
The Torah makes it clear that a woman should wear women's clothes and men should wear men's clothes. And how we want to define what that looks like, look, whatever. But there's one thing that's for sure is a tallit gadol. There are tallit gadol. There is a style of a tallit gadol that is very masculine looking.
Yeah.
Right. And then they make the same tallit gadol that is made for women that have, my daughter has one that's that we got her for her bat mitzvah that's silk and see-through and got this purple and pink
it's clearly for a young lady.
And I would never be caught,
feminine isn't bad for
exactly
a woman.
I would never be caught dead in it.
Right.
But and my wife has one that she doesn't wear it very often, but she has one that's got pink doves all over it and all this kind of stuff. There are tallitot for women that are made specifically for women, and then there are tallitot made specifically for men. And a kippa's, similar conversation. There are kippot that are, because it is becoming more common in some of
Judaism,
ordinary Judaism what's the word?
Normative.
Normative. Thank you. Because look, let's be honest. This whole episode shows that Messianic Judaism is abnormal.
Yeah. Well, even
in a lot of ways,
even in the Messianic sphere, like even getting men to wear kippot, like unless a congregation requires it, it's still a 50-50 whether or not men are wearing them or not.
And so like there are kippot because normative Judaism, in a lot of ways, are moving towards women being able to wear a kippah. There are kippot made for women that are like, the Mennonites have the little doily-looking things. I don't know what they're called, but the little doily-looking things. They right. That's the technical term. There are kippot for women that are like that are doily. My mother-in-law has one that actually I think my mom has one as well. That's like this. It's made out of like jewelry metal with like little beads, and it's twisted metal all together, wire twisting all together with beads and stuff on it, and it's got like a barrette comb on the backside that clips into the hair and what have you. Like it's very feminine, very ornate, very obvious for a woman. Like I wouldn't wear it. Like it would look dumb on me. Also, I don't have hair, so it'd be hard to keep it on. But aside from that, like it would.
I think if we use some effort, we could get the comb
into the
flesh and get it there.
I joked once about having they do the surgical implants for like the like weird canine teeth and all this kind of stuff, like for aestheticism, and it's like I'm gonna have snaps surgically implanted on my head so I can just snap my kippah on.
That?
I don't. I mean, I'm sure somebody could do it, but no. It was So, but there are clearly like tallit, a kippah, whatever. They're very clearly feminine options. Yeah. Like, and in our congregation, I mean, I don't make a big deal out of it the first time I see it, because a lot of times the first time you might see it as a visitor, and they may just not know any different, or they may come from somewhere that didn't care and didn't say anything. Yeah. So I'll get opportunity to kind of get to know somebody, and generally speaking, these are the types of conversations you have with people that you learn pretty quick whether or not they're teachable, whether or not they're going to be good in your community or not. When you sit down and go, hey, look, I appreciate your desire to interact with this, right? I appreciate your wanting to wear this prayer covering, the tallit, and interact in that way. But listen, this is a man's garment, and there are men's garments, there are women's garments. If you want to wear one, I can send you links for where you can find some that are very feminine that will do you very well. But what you have, that black and white one, is very clearly a man's garment. Yeah. So I do think that, I was going in the same direction.
They make them age specific too. Like you can go like boys keep like they make a little like baseball pattern and basketball. It's like clearly no grown man is going to wear that.
I for years wore a knit yellow kippah that had a giant smiley face on it, and I would wear it in restaurants when I worked in restaurants all the time because it was just funny. Or my New York Yankees kippah. Yeah,
at our congregation, we just tell people, as again, like you, not the first time someone shows up and pulls one out of the bag, but we just tell them, look. If you want to wear a tallit, that's wonderful. If that's your conviction, you're feeling led to do that. But if you're a woman, you should wear a tallit that no man would put on. Right. That is so clearly feminine, because the fringes were commanded to be put on the corners of your garments, and men's garments and women's garments were different, and they were identifiably different. So a woman's garment should be a woman's garment. It should be, and there are beautiful ones. My wife has one that's silk, hand-painted silk. That's a beautiful tallit. But it's one that I would not ever wear because it's so feminine that it's clearly not something I would wear.
Now, just out of curiosity, this has nothing to do with the direction of our current conversation, but I think it's fun to throw a poll out every once in a while. What's your preferred style of tallit?
I like the over the shoulders. Like I
don't talk about wearing it.
Yeah. How do you? Because it goes down to the size. Like you can't take a 24-inch wide tallit.
Oh no, I have a 70-inch.
Yeah.
No, I like the ones that you wear standard around your shoulders. The only time I ever wore like the gadol was when I had to borrow David's at the Southeast Regional, because all the kids all the young adults they brought up to do Torah readings, none of them brought tallits. and I had to give them all my extra ones, including the one I was wearing.
Show up to Torah reading without a tallit.
Yeah,
get out of here.
So,
I
wear a 70-inch, so it's the long one that you can wear like a cape.
Yeah.
It's every superhero has a cape. So
I prefer the large blanket style, the 72 to 80 inch, and I have it tossed up over my shoulders. And I mean, the tradition, as far as the tradition goes, the tallit gadol is not what's commanded. It's a ceremonial garment. It's there. Honestly, it's there as a loophole to get out of making effort to wear a tallit katan all the time. If we're being honest about why a tallit gadol came on the picture to begin with, because four-corner garments weren't common anymore. So we went, here's a way to get around this, right? But aside from that, tallit gadol is beautiful, and it's a powerful resource in prayer.
Do you wear one of the Ethiopian ones?
I have an Ethiopian one, yep.
I do too.
And I love seeing those at the marketplace and the conferences.
They're really beautiful.
They're gorgeous.
If you can get they're priced really well.
Yeah, really, and I have a big one. I think that one's 80 something, 84 inch maybe.
That's the one I borrowed from you.
Yeah,
it was your Ethiopian tallit gadol.
But the reason why Rabbi Eric jokes and calls them capes, the reason they're worn the way they are is because then you have your tzitziot, two in the front, two in the rear, kind of symbolic of being in forward and backward. And but I like the way it looks. I like that. Now, I hate the work that goes into it, because like every 3 minutes you're having to
which is
readjust
why I really thought you took it off when you spoke.
No, that's mainly why I don't like.
Yeah,
I don't like fooling with it.
I have clips for mine and I like it because I don't look as fat when I have the two things of the front. So I'm like okay, I look reasonably good.
It's kind of like people ask me every time I go preach somewhere, teach somewhere, and I open up question answer time. Someone, do you wear a beard because you're Jewish? And I said, no, I wear a beard because I'm ugly and it covers part of my face. So you wear your tallit that way because you're fat.
There's
Is that what you're saying?
There's an Orthodox jeweler that came out. I've had them for a few years now. That came out with these. They call them tallit jewelry, but they're like tallit rings. They're these neat little rings that have a specific design where the metal's twisted in such a way so that it kind of grabs the tallit. So when you put it up like I do with the four corners and all, you run the front corners through it. Instead of having to wear clips, you run the front corners through it as high as you want, and it kind of holds everything together right here. So more or less all you have to do is every once in a while pull it down, because it will slip backward, but you pull it down a little bit.
Where do you find those?
I'll send you a link for it. As a matter of fact, I could put a link in the podcast.
I wear mine like you do. I wear, I like.
Okay, so I'm the only one that does the shoulder.
No, he does.
No, I do the shoulder, but I have the one that I can wear.
He has a big one, but he does it.
When I do weddings or things like that, then I'll wear it long. But for the reason that it falls down constantly and I don't have my clips, I wear it the way I do.
I found on accident yesterday when I was looking for that bag for you, I found do you remember the clips that the jeweler made for me that for my bar mitzvah that were modeled off of yours from your bar mitzvah? I found those arbitrarily when I was digging for that bag in our storage container.
Well, that's cool.
I want to say that, but that leads to talking about the tallit leads to just another thought that I have, and that's the tallit is one of the most beautiful parts of Jewish worship expression to me. The first time I walked into a Messianic synagogue, that was one of the things. It was two things that I'll never forget that really impacted me more than anything. It was the sound of the Hebrew language, and it was the tallit. So I have quite a selection of tallits that I've accrued over the years because I just love them so much.
Quite a wardrobe.
Yeah. But it gets my goat when I am at a Torah reading or a service and I see not just young men, Jewish young men related to rabbis. I don't have a tallit. Can I borrow yours? And I'm like, I'm a Gentile with like 3 in my bag.
Yeah.
You're serious? And I really think young men should have tallits. I think young men should wear them. It gets my goat when I feel like it is a part of embracing being worshiping the Lord.
Yeah.
Being a man, but women have them too. But I'm just saying, there's something about when I see a man covering his family with his tallit during like the Aaronic blessing and things like that.
Yeah.
But when I see young men like, can I borrow your tallit? And I'm like, sure. And then I go and put another one on that I had in my bag. Oh, yeah. Can I get your tallit?
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, take this stuff seriously, man.
Yeah, and I think, again, of course, I'll bring up that there is an argument and a tradition where, normally it's not traditional for young men to wear tallit until they're married. However, I think that if you are above the age of bar mitzvah and you are committed to walking with God and walking with your family,
and you're doing something on stage,
and you're doing something that's especially on stage,
and to the greatest portion of Judaism, at bar mitzvah is when young men begin to wear tallits. Now there are sects that are separate, but the thing I look at is, there are people who will wear a kippah but not a tallit, and the tallit is actually commanded. The kippah is a traditional replacement or a symbolic covering like the priests wore. So there's a biblical reason to wear a kippah, but we're commanded to wear tallit. Now, I will say that we have some young men in our congregation who wear tallit katans. They're wearing fringes, but so they don't wear a tallit gadol. Yeah. But they're being obedient to the actual commandment. I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
But
what Toby's talking about is
those that just don't take anything seriously. I'm here for whatever reason.
Toby's talking about young men woke up in the hotel room at the conference, wore the suit their mom packed for them, and
or a t-shirt.
Yeah, and showed up. Help me out, man.
It tells me how much of you have to own this stuff.
Right.
See, it's that kind of stuff that I go back into.
Yeah. Own it, not as in buy it and own it, but own it as in make it a part of who you are.
Yes, make it a part of who you are, because those are the people that God uses. It's the people that weren't perfect, but it's the people that were like, I want as much as I can get of God. And God's like, it's all available.
Yeah.
It's just some people are fine with just a little bit. Right.
There are things, and you mentioned earlier, Rabbi Toby, that when you came into a synagogue, the Hebrew moved you, seeing the tallits moved you.
Yes. Wanted to cry and didn't know why.
The things that really affect people's hearts are audible or visually moving. The tallit is one. You mentioned one of the things, when people come to our congregation, one of the things that we hear most often spoken of is first the procession of the Torah.
Right.
The moving of the children and the people following the Torah being processed around, just like the children of Israel followed the ark around the wilderness, our people followed the Torah around the sanctuary. So there's something really heart gripping about that. But the other is something that you mentioned a minute ago, and that was when we gather together at the end of service for the Birkat HaKohanim, the Aaronic benediction, and the husbands and the men who are there gather together with other and place the husband places the tallit over his wife and his children and gather them together under this covering, this canopy of faith.
Right.
It is such a symbolically powerful moment. And we actually had just a few weeks ago, we had 1 week where we sang like Marty Getz and Misha, the Aaronic benediction that they do. I didn't cant the benediction, and then the next week my throat was hurting. I didn't cant it. By the third week of not canting it, we had people from the congregation coming up and saying, "Look, you can't not do that." Yeah. That part of the service is so meaningful when my family gathers together, and I love the song, and it's great that we're singing the song together and all that. But there's something about having our congregational leader bless the congregation and each of the families gathering together and under the tallitot and together as under the canopy of their family and participating is something that's moving and heart touching.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's and all these things that we talked about from the tambourines to the shofar. Did you get to say everything you wanted to about shofars, Jonathan?
Pretty much.
Okay.
I did want to touch on flags before we go again, though.
Yeah,
I did have something to add about that.
Okay, well, go ahead. But I just didn't know, because I was just saying all these things go back to we love telling these stories. We love laughing about them, but it really does mean that
We only laugh in hindsight.
we only laugh in hindsight because these things highlight the need for order and in the service.
And for those in authority to actually like step in and
You've
say
got to do something.
But for example, this year we went this past Southeast Conference. We went, and in the handout they gave for the worship services, it and this is a soapbox for me, and I'm going to pound it. It drove me nuts that they had it written verbatim in there. Please do not, engage in like flag waving and
unauthorized flag waving.
Unauthorized flag waving. It's unlicensed flag waving. And so I show up, and they're like, people are waving.
You got to tell them they've got to have flag licenses available.
Flag license. I'm going to come up. I'm going to design a license for shofarot, for tambourines,
and for flag. Go on the little.
That's right. The little ribbons that go on the conference attending thing.
Authorized flag waving.
That's right. You don't have a ribbon.
Sorry,
you got to get off. No, it's fine. No, it's part of what this is. So, but like, and it was funny because you had some people who were waving like these little streamers. They weren't on a pole, so they weren't technically flags.
Like the rhythmic gymnastics.
I was like, dude, this is like, you're like crawling towards this. You're crawling. And then like by the last worship service, they were waving full on flags, but no one said anything. None of the leadership. I was like, y'all were
going to put it there, police it.
Y'all were like the kids who like, let's see if mom will, like, if I do this little, like if I take the lid off the cookie jar, let's see if mom says anything.
It kind of reminded me of when I was a kid, we used to get Charlie's chips.
Do you remember that far back?
I do. We used to get Charlie's chips. Do you remember the chips that came in the big tin cans? They delivered them like milkmen. Milkmen came to the house in my day and dropped off milk in the morning and then picked up the empty bottles. We used to get potato chips delivered to the house in a truck, like a UPS truck.
Yeah.
And they were like these big cans full of chips. And when we were kids, we would go in, and my dad would say you couldn't have any, but when he wasn't there, we'd go and we'd eat some chips. And then we'd fluff up the can to try to make the chips look like we hadn't eaten any out of it. And, by the end of the month, the chips are gone, and we're all, I didn't have any chips, And it's like incrementally pretending till you can't pretend anymore that we're not actually doing what we're not supposed to. And that's what happened with those. They had the little, it's not a flag, it's a streamer. And then it became a little bigger. And then and finally, the end of it, they've got these 20-foot flags like you see at a football game.
Somebody yanked one off the back of their pickup truck.
Back and forth.
Of course, it's funny. David and I are over here trying not to die laughing at like 10 cans of milk getting delivered like what, in the 1950s.
The thing I think is the most complicated about this, and I guess this is the angle that we really didn't touch on, is that yes, there is a need for order. There's an obligation for order, and there's a need for correction when things are out of order. But there is there's a difficulty to figuring out how, because interpersonal relationships are different with everybody, right? And everybody, especially today, everybody is so up in arms about everything. Everybody responds to correction in a different way. Some people instantaneously take that correction, absorb it, and they're good, and they go on. Other people, it may take weeks of just fierce anger before they go, oh, you know what? You may have been right. I'm sorry about that, right? And so I think one of the biggest complications to the conversation on the correction side is, how do you healthily bring correction in these scenarios, these situations, without hurting people's feelings or crushing them or making them feel like they're not allowed to worship freely in your congregation?
I think there's two keys. One is that you should parent children that you brought into the world, and not just your own children, but for instance, if you're the one that discipled somebody, you brought them to the synagogue, you're there, you should speak to them if somebody does something that's not within the scope of the normative for that congregation, because different congregations have different ways they do things. But if they're hammering a tambourine, and that's not the normative for your congregation, then if you brought them, use your relationship to disciple them in how to properly do that. Secondarily, the leadership, actual leaders. Nobody, if you don't have a leadership position and you're not the person that brought that person into the world, you're not the parent to that child, you're not Timothy's father, so to speak, biblically, then keep your mouth shut. And let people that have that position teach and share, because people, the thing that drives people craziest is when somebody that shouldn't speak into their life speaks into their life, and that causes a pushback. It's a natural pushback. Like, who are you to tell me? You're not the rabbi. You're not an elder. You're not the worship leader. You're not the usher. You're not you're just sitting next to me. Stop. So we need to be responsible for our children, be they spiritual or physical, and deal with teaching them and discipling them, disciplining them in the proper way to worship for our community. And again, each community is different somewhat. And we need to, if somebody's doing something and it seems inappropriate to you, then go to a leader and talk to them about it and let that leader deal with it and trust them. If you go to somebody and say, that crazy person sitting next to me was beating on a tambourine, it drove me crazy and all, once you tell the leader, trust that leader is going to handle it the way God would have them handle it.
Right.
Because they may not immediately go over and talk to him. It's a first-time visitor. You may want to build a relationship to where you can speak into their life a little bit before you do. So you don't just go to somebody and say, you shouldn't be tambourine, and they go just leave the building because they don't want to be, tambourine, that's my thing. This is the only connection to God I have. Thing. And there are people like that. And I'm not just talking about tambourines, but there are people, their worship, their form of worship is that which may be out of order in your community, but it may have been wholly in order in the community they came from. Yeah. They may have been going to a synagogue for 30 years, and every service they beat that tambourine or waved their tallitot as if it was a flag or whatever. And now they're in a different environment.
And they need a whole new line of products,
right? And
introduced to them,
and they need to deal with that. So to answer the question, how do we deal with it? You deal with it using the authority that's God given. You're a parent, you parent. You're a leader, you lead. Otherwise, go to a leader and share it with them and let them deal with it, and trust that they will lead.
Yeah, and things like conferences, you can, especially if you're a leader at a conference, you can say and add reminders at the beginning of services, like, hey, just as a reminder, we do, we ask you to please do this, please do not do this. I was at a conference one time, a youth conference years ago, and there was a rule where they did not allow young people to be off in rooms of opposite sexes together. I remember one time, it's funny, I was just hanging out with my friends, and all of a sudden I realized that a bunch of us were not by ourselves, but a bunch of us together were all in the room of opposite sex, away from the main group, and just very casually, the pastor...
Rule breaker.
Yeah, I know. The pastor mentioned that at the beginning of the service. He was like, please, young people, we just ask that you not be away from the main group and, differing gender mixes. Yeah. And, the other thing is, one of my favorite Proverbs 15:1, where it says, a gentle answer turneth away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. When you do confront something, confront it with gentleness.
Right. Because the worst thing a leader can do is nothing.
Yeah. And you actually have to confront it. You actually have to do something.
So was it the historian and you quoting from the KJV?
No. No, it was the the first lookup that came up.
We hope that this has been enlightening, enjoyable, maybe educational to you.
Maybe.
I hope that it was. If you have any comments or questions or thoughts, feel free to drop it on social media or on this post itself. And if you have any things you'd like for us to discuss in a future episode, feel free to do that also. It's always a blessing to be with these gentlemen and hang out and just share our thoughts, our minds.
I was going to say, if I design a license for any one of these things, can we post a link in the in the podcast so people can download it and have one just for joke's sake?
And actually, I was actually going to suggest that we post a link for ajudaica.com and such, because if they are looking for a tallit that would be appropriate to them, they can find it there, as well as we may put out a couple other links that people can find.
And real quick plug, I'm sorry, I know we've gone over time, but men's conference is coming up in April 21st to 23rd. So if you have not registered, you can go to shalompensacola.com, go to the men's page, and you can find the Messianic Men's Conference link. Go ahead and register and sign up. It's only $70 for the whole weekend. We're going to have great speakers. We've got Rabbi Eric Carlson as our main speaker, and we're going to have axe throwing competition that week, so we'll get a bunch of good teaching, good fellowship, and a little bit of competitive edge.
Thank you for listening to the MessianTics podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at MessianTics Podcast.